Senator-elect, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks, Jake. Good to be with you.
So why write this op-ed and why do it now?
Well, I actually wrote a very similar op-ed before I got into the primary in Utah and laid out my views with regards to the president and his presidency, and noted that I'll work with the president as I would, frankly, with any president, which is on those areas where I'm in agreement, we'll be able to work together. Where I disagree, I'll point that out. But in matters that relate to the divisiveness that's been part of our political environment, I'll speak out if I feel the need to, if there's something significant. And I think it's important as I begin this new job to make it very clear where I stand. And I also note that the departure of Secretary Mattis and the decision to pull out of Syria in the abrupt way that it was done was a precipitating event for my finally going on this record.
I want to talk about Syria in a minute, but I do want to focus on the op-ed for a second. A senior White House official told me today that the president was disappointed that you, even before you were sworn in, would go after him instead of joining him and going after Democrats in the shutdown. What's your response to that?
Well, with regards to the shutdown, I'll be with Republicans on that front, which is I think it's important for us to secure the border. At the same time, what I did in my op-ed was not just talk about the president and my relationship with him and how we'll work together, but also I laid out my perspectives and priorities on a very broad basis on everything from trade to China to our allies around the world, immigration and so forth. So I think it's important as you begin a new job to describe exactly what you hope to accomplish, and that's what I did.
The president mentioned you in his cabinet meeting today. Here's just a little bit of what he had to say.
I wish Mitt could be more of a team player. You know, I'm surprised he did it this quickly. If he fought really hard against President Obama, like he does against me, he would have won the election.
What's your response? What's your thought when you see that?
Well, the president, of course, is entitled to his perspectives, his own views, and I respect his right to express those things, just as I do, and we'll work together on things that I think are in the best interest of the country and my state, and where we disagree, why we'll just have to disagree.
He seemed to note that other senators who'd come before you to criticize him, Jeff Flake from Arizona, Bob Corker from Tennessee, suddenly aren't in the U.S. Senate anymore, even though they wanted to be there forever. It seemed to be like a vague threat, not that he would necessarily get rid of you, but that the base would abandon you if you're not with him.
You know, I think if people come to Washington with the express hope of staying in the job forever, they're making a huge mistake. The idea of this democratic republic is that people would come representing the people that elected them and also representing the views and values that they have. And I come to Washington with that perspective. And I'm really not looking for the next election and the next spot. I'm looking to try and represent things I think our country needs at a critical time. And I do believe that a president, like any leader in a home, in a church, in a school, in a business, a leader has an impact not just on policies, but also on the character of the people who get to watch that person. And I think that's an area the president needs to focus more attention and hopefully make some changes there. And by the way, I expect people will have some suggestions for how I could do a better job, too, and I'm open to that.
When you say that you have issues with his character and you talk about his integrity and honesty, the suggestion being that he lacks integrity and honesty, what specifically has he done that has bothered you? What is the rhetoric that has come from his mouth, his actions that trouble you the most?
Well, over the course of the last 2 years, I have put out a number of statements that relate to things that were of a great concern to me. The Charlottesville response by the president was something that gave me great concern. The support for Roy Moore in the Senate race was something I was very, very concerned about. His attack on the media, I wrote an entire piece about that. So I've laid out time and again places where I disagree with the president, and I think it's very important for a president to demonstrate the qualities of integrity and honesty, forthrightness, empathy, and respect for the institutions of our democratic republic. I think those are all parts of the job. And while I agree with them on a lot of policy fronts and salute the work that's been done by the Republican leadership in Washington, there are places that relate to the, if you will, forming of national character that I think we can do a better job.
Well, you've called him a fraud. I mean, in 2016, you gave a very strong speech was it in Utah or Arizona, calling him a fraud. Some people who are allied with the president, some people who are not allied with the president say, hey, you know, the president endorsed you in your Senate race and you accepted the endorsement. The president pointed that out today. You interviewed for a job with him to be potentially Secretary of State. What changed? Why were you willing to talk to him and accept his endorsement when you have all these reservations about him?
Well, you know, after he was elected president, it was very much my hope that he would rise to the occasion, rise to the mantle of the office. After all, becoming president of the United States is quite an elevation for anybody. And he has said during the campaign that he could be extraordinary presidential. When I hear that, I think of Washington and Lincoln and Jefferson and Roosevelt and Kennedy and Eisenhower, and I think of those qualities. And I think that while he spoke of that, and while that was my hope, I don't think he's followed through on that front the way he's followed through on some of his other promises.
Do you regret accepting his endorsement when he sent that tweet during your Senate race?
He was endorsing me. I wasn't endorsing him. And I haven't decided who I'm going to endorse in 2020. I'm going to wait and see what the alternatives are.
So you're not on board? Because the senior senator from Utah, Mike Lee, said he is likely going to endorse the president.
I think it's early to make that decision, and I want to see what the alternatives are. But I've pointed out there are places where we agree and a whole series of policy fronts. But there are places that I think the president can, if you will, elevate his game and do a better job to help bring us together as a nation.
Is there any chance that you might emerge as an alternative to President Trump and run against him for president in the primaries in 2020?
No, you may have heard I ran before. Yeah. I've had that experience. And by the way, I acknowledge the president was successful, and I was not. He did something I couldn't do. He won. And I recognize that and appreciate that. But no, I'm not running again. And we'll see whether someone else does in a Republican primary or not, but time will tell.
You said in March of 2016, because there was a whole big thing in 2012, kids out there might not remember this, but when you ran for president, Donald Trump wanted to endorse you, you wanted him to endorse you, and there was an event in Las Vegas, and you accepted his endorsement. And then in March 2016, you wrote in a tweet, if Trump had said 4 years ago the things he says today about the Klan, Muslims, Mexicans, disabled, I would not have accepted his endorsement. Now, some people point out, okay, he hadn't said those things, but he was the nation's leading birther, pushing the lie that Barack Obama, the first African-American president, was born in Africa. Again, a lie. And you accepted his endorsement even though that was his political claim to fame. Was that a mistake?
You know, I'm sure I've made a lot of mistakes, I'll let other people make the assessment of which things were mistakes and not. But when the president of the United States, frankly, of either party, were to say, "I'm endorsing your candidacy," I think you'd say, "Thank you very much." I pointed out, I think, pretty consistently throughout the years, the places where I've disagreed with candidate Donald Trump and now President Trump, and I'll continue to do so. And hopefully there'll be fewer of those occasions. I don't intend to be a daily commentator, to be someone who stops every evening in the hall of the Senate and looks for the nearest camera and says what I think about the president's tweet or the fault of the day. But if there's a matter of great significance, I'll speak out on that. And sometimes it's a difficult call about
how do you decide that?
And you have to make that decision. And people will say, well, this is different than the last time. It's like, well, you make your decision as best as you possibly can. But I know what my principles are, what I think is right for the country. And I know that right now the country is as divided as I've ever seen it. People, in many respects, are angry and resentful, and they want to see leaders who can unite us and push through those things and deal with the challenges we have with our excessive spending, the budget being out of alignment, the immigration mess we have, our education challenges, our health care needs. There's so many things they want to see us do that these other things get in the way, and I'd like to be able to focus on the things that are most important and remove some of the divisiveness and anger and bitterness that exists in politics today.
I want to move on to some of the substantive issues, but I do have to ask you, the chairwoman of the Republican National Committee, Romney McDaniel, who is your older brother Scott's daughter, she tweeted about your criticism, and she wrote, quote, on Twitter, for an incoming Republican freshman senator, that's Uncle Mitt, to attack real Donald Trump as their first act feeds into what the Democrats and media want and is disappointing and unproductive. Were you surprised? I know you gave her a heads up that the op-ed was coming, but were you surprised that she publicly criticized you?
No, she's the chairwoman of the Republican Party. She has a responsibility. I respect her right to express that viewpoint. It's probably more, if you will, civil than it might have been across the Thanksgiving dinner table, because we of course have disagreements in our family. But she's a very loyal Republican, loyal to the president, and she's doing what she thinks is best for him and for the party. One
of the criticisms, this is my last Trump question, one of the criticisms about people who have come before you, Republican senators, consciences of the party, Jeff Flake, Bob Corker, is that generally speaking, there would be tisk-tisking, but no action. Up until there's a couple exceptions. Bob Corker pushed forward some sanctions against Russia as the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and Jeff Flake stopped voting for judges until Mitch McConnell would bring forward the bill to protect Robert Mueller, which Mitch McConnell never did. So he ended up putting a hold on judges indefinitely. Are you prepared to take actions as opposed to just expressing dismay if the moment calls for it?
Well, the answer is I will support those positions that I agree with, and I will oppose and vote against things I disagree with. But I don't think you go to Washington saying, well, I'm actually going to cut off my nose to spite my face. I'm going to vote against people who I actually would support just to be tough on the president. That doesn't make any sense.
We're just hours away from the Democrats' takeover of the House, with the clock ticking to the start of day 13 of the partial government shutdown. Hours away from a whole new reality for this president when Nancy Pelosi officially takes the reins. But the speaker-to-be is wasting no time, flexing her muscles over President Trump's pet project, telling NBC she'll give, quote, nothing for the wall, and saying this after congressional leaders met with the president about the shutdown behind closed doors in the White House Situation Room.
We're asking the president to open up government. We are giving him a Republican path to do that. Why would he not do it? Why would he not do it?
Why? Simple. A source telling CNN that Senator Chuck Schumer asked the president not once, not twice, but 3 times to give him just one good reason that he won't take the Democrats' offer. The president's response, quote, I would look foolish if I did that. That should probably be the least of this president's worries. Like I said, the clock is ticking. As of tomorrow, his party will no longer have total control of the government. He will no longer have a majority in the House. And Democrats are salivating at the idea that they could eat his lunch. He can't even count on Senate Republicans, like new Senator Mitt Romney, who told our very own Jake Tapper this tonight.
After he was elected president, it was very much my hope that he would rise to the occasion, rise to the mantle of the office. I don't think he's followed through on that front the way he's followed through on some of his other promises.
In a matter of hours, things are going to get real for this president, who said today that he'll keep the government shut down for as long as it takes, who shocked his own military and our allies with his sudden announcement of a troop withdrawal from Syria, and who is facing some 17 investigations, 17, into pretty much every aspect of his life, from his campaign to his administration to his businesses. And with all of that looming, the president held one of his televised cabinet meetings today. You got to look at the pictures from that meeting because they pretty much tell the story of this administration, okay? True story here. Acting Defense Secretary Patrick Shanahan, acting. Acting Attorney General Matthew Whitaker, acting. Acting EPA Administrator Andrew Wheeler. Acting Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney. Acting Interior Secretary David Bernhardt, who you probably won't be surprised to learn is an ex-oil lobbyist. And the president? Well, in a way, he's acting too. Acting like some kind of action hero. Did you guys see this? With some sort of Game of Thrones style poster prominently displayed on the table. Acting like a tough guy. Acting. By the way, no one in the room bothered to explain exactly why the poster was there. Is this like a movie or something that's coming soon? But seriously, though, this is no game. This is the eve of the day that could change everything for this president. But he's doing what he's been doing since day one. Making false statements, misleading claims, downright lying. Again and again and again. The biggest whopper of all may have been this. that he told about the defense secretary, the former defense secretary, James Mattis, who resigned last month.
I wish him well. I hope he does well. But as you know, President Obama fired him, and essentially so did I.
There's no essentially about it. Mattis was not fired. Okay, he wasn't fired, no matter how many times this president says that. He quit on December 20th in a letter that made his feelings about this president's policies pretty clear. Right now, let me quote from that letter. Okay? So he says here, he says, quote, "My views on treating allies with respect and also being clear-eyed about both malign actors and strategic competitors are strongly held and informed by over 4 decades of immersion in these issues. Because you have the right to have a Secretary of Defense whose views are better aligned with yours and these and other subjects, I believe it is right for me to step down from my position. I believe it is right for me to step down from my position." Was there a quote about it essentially fired? Step down. That's not being fired, no matter what the president claims. And speaking of the president's foreign policy, there is this helping of word salad.
Russia used to be the Soviet Union. Afghanistan made it Russia because they went bankrupt fighting in Afghanistan. Russia. The reason Russia was in Afghanistan was because terrorists were going into Russia. They were right to be there. The problem is it was a tough fight. And literally they went bankrupt. They went into being called Russia again as opposed to the Soviet Union. You know, a lot of these places you're reading about now are no longer part of Russia because of Afghanistan.
I hope you have some time here because there's a lot to unpack about what he just said. The Soviet Union did not literally go bankrupt. The economy collapsed, which is not the same as going bankrupt. Hat tip to our friends at the Washington Post for that one. Afghanistan may have been a part of that, but it certainly didn't cause the Soviet economy to collapse. And as for the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, the United States government says was all about keeping a friendly socialist government on its border. Okay? But wait, there's more.
I think I would have been a good general, but who knows?
Well, to be a general, you'd have to be in the military. Sorry. You'd have to be in the military if you want to be a general, and a good one. So I remind you, it was just last week that the daughters of a Queens doctor said that he had diagnosed Donald Trump with bone spurs to help him avoid the Vietnam draft as a favor to Trump's father. You have to be in the military to be a general. And just listen to what the president says about Bashar al-Assad's brutal war on his own people, a war that kills so many that the UN says it's virtually impossible to come up with an accurate death toll.
Syria was lost long ago. It was lost long ago. And besides that, I don't know, we're talking about sand and death. That's what we're talking about. We're not talking about, you know, vast wealth.
Well, I guess it should be no surprise that vast wealth appears to be the deciding factor for President Trump. To this day, he has refused to condemn Saudi Arabia for the brutal murder of Washington Post journalist Jamal Khashoggi. The president also had a lot to say about his promised wall. But this is mind-blowing.
Look, when they say the wall's immoral, well, then you got to do something about the Vatican, because the Vatican has the biggest wall of them all.
Yes, there is a wall around the Vatican, which has absolutely nothing to do with a wall on our southern border. And by the way, a whole lot of Vatican City is entirely open to the public, wall or no wall. And listen to what President Trump says about the executive order by President Obama creating DACA.
If the Supreme Court rules that President Obama was wrong, which they should, because, by the way, if he was right, then I've been given tremendous power. Can you imagine me having that power? Wouldn't that be scary? Right?
Right. That would be scary. The president also had this to say about Christmas when he says he was home alone in the White House.
I was here on Christmas evening. I was all by myself in the White House. It's a big, big house, except for all the guys out on the lawn with machine guns, nicest machine guns ever. But I was there all alone with the machine gunners, and I felt very safe.
All alone. Now let me think who else was at the White House on Christmas evening. Oh yeah, well, Melania Trump, the First Lady, who flew with the president to Iraq. But all those, let's call them misstatements, they're kind of besides the point. Because like I said, the clock is ticking. In just a few hours, this president is going to wake up to a whole new reality. A world where he can't just threaten Congress into giving him what he wants. That's going to be a tough one for him.